In the life of an addict, what does surrender mean? Welcome to episode 9 of Two Drunks with a Mic, the podcast where we share our past so that others might have a future. So, Randy, what does that question mean to you? Surrender.
Surrender is to surrender yourself, myself, and that's on a daily basis. It doesn't matter how long you've been sober. You know, we had to surrender to get sober, and to live a sober life, we've got to surrender on a daily basis. And that's surrendering the past, the future, and surrendering allows me to stay in the present, in the moment.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it's a constant action. It's something that you have found you need to do to maintain your 16 years of sobriety. When you say you're surrendering to new ways of thinking, you know, where the old ways of thinking might be coming in, or you might want to react in a certain way to a certain situation, but you know, God's directing your life and you need to surrender, you know, to his will. Is that what I'm kind of hearing?
For sure, Ian. I'm a full-blown addict, man. My mind is one of the worst places for me to go. So, you know, I need help in that area because I am my worst advisor. So I have to turn my life over to God, you know. So the way I start my day, Ian, before I walk out that front door, I make sure I get right with God. That's my first step of surrendering. And it has been many times where I'll be in a hurry and leave, and my day isn't the same. So I read a lot of scriptures. I read out of the Bible first thing in the morning, and that really helps. It's like, I've said this before, it's the renewing of the mind. You know, I need to keep the mind. Yeah, the mind. What was that scripture? Somehow.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned it on that one episode. It was that Proverbs. I forget what it was, but I want to ask you something though. And because there's no doubt in my mind that there's people that are listening to this podcast that aren't believers in God, or they are not, they're not where we're at. And that's okay. I don't expect everybody to have our same view. And, you know, we made that clear. We don't mind that people disagree with us. But one thing that we do know, whether a person has 1 day, 5 days, or that many number of years, it doesn't matter, that surrender is the one thing that has to be. So what would you say to a person that maybe isn't there on a second step, man, to use, you know, the AA model, you know, the God thing, the spiritual thing? What would you say to a person like that is hearing what you're saying about the Bible and stuff and just, you know, giving it the finger going, man, screw that. I'm not down with that. I know how I feel about it, but I'm interested in what your take on that is.
Yeah. I can understand, and, you know, Ian, a lot of people have had different paths, man. And the whole God thing is just not going to click for them. There's, you know, and you've heard many stories. I would have to say, man, you're going to have to definitely surrender, you know, just be free from yourself. Don't rely on self to move forward in sobriety. There has to be a power greater than yourself that you can lean on. It could be anything. It could be, you know, the sun. I mean, look what that sun is, right where it needs to be for us to survive and grow crops and all that. And that, you know, I'm not going to sit here and try to, you know, pick out your higher power, but definitely don't want to rely on yourself. That will take you back out quicker.
Right.
And you know?
Yeah. And I knew that's where you were going to go with it, because that's the main point that, you know, in, I think it was episode 8, I talked about self-forgiveness and self-worth. And I was later talking to a friend of mine, and I said, you know, and he does a lot of speaking, a lot of public speaking and sermons and stuff. And we were kind of laughing because he gets challenged and questions about something that he may say during one of his sermons. And I knew where he was coming from. He knew where he was coming from, but there's a little ambiguity in there. So it leaves things open to interpretation. So he's always answering questions. And I kind of laughed about that. And I said, I just did an episode on self-forgiveness and self-worth. And I meant every single word of it. It is one of the most important things that as addicts, just as people, man, we need to recognize that we are valuable. Man, I've had so many people contact me, Randy, saying that they needed to hear that. They needed to hear that message. And it's helped them negotiate a circumstance that they're going through in their lives, man. And I'm humbled and blessed from hearing that. It's really, really is cool. But I think where clarification needed, if I were to think back on that and wanted to make some clarification, there's a big difference between what I was talking about, self-forgiveness and self-worth, and this self-reliance that you're warning against, because you'll hear it over and over that surrender is exactly what you were just saying. It is giving yourself power, everything that's gotten you to where you are in your life today as an addict, stay struggling or just in a bad spot. Your best thinking got you there. You need to give that over to something. And to sort of echo what I thought I heard you were saying was, you don't have to accept the idea of God. You just need to accept the fact that you're not God. And I'm not, as a Christian, I would hope that everybody could find Christ and everybody could, find the happiness and success that we found in that. But the reality is that a lot of people don't. I want to meet them there, man. I want to say, I get where you're coming from. But it's that surrender of self. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. I mean, Ian, when you got in the program or when you first got sober, even you always believed in God, I did, as well. I used to get down on my knees and pray before I headed out my door when I was really wrapped up, man, because I just always knew there was a good chance I wasn't going to come back. So I would get down on my knees and pray to God to bring me back home safe, because there's nothing stopping me now. I'm going out that door, and you know how it is, guys. Once it's set in your head, you're off to the races. So, that wasn't that difficult for me, Ian. And like I said before, there's a lot of people out there, man, that witness a lot more than we have. And, it's a tough situation. It's hard to advise somebody, man. I mean, but like you said, you have to surrender, fully. That's like in that 12-step program, it's a step that you take are you willing to surrender, turn your life over, all that, man. And I think that whether you use the 12-step program or you're with a mentor, that's a step all around. Are you ready to just let go? Ask yourself that. Or do you want to hang on to some things? That's not fully letting go, And when you really come to that realization that there's no way that you can do this thing on your own, most people that have gotten to this point have tried to do it on their own, most people that are listening, that's why they wound up in AA or whatnot. But now I will say this is you will fall short, man. But I don't underestimate that decision to turn your life and your will over to the care of God. That's big, man. That's powerful.
Even taking that initial step, right? Even just saying, man, okay, even a person that can sit there and say, okay, I'm not going to follow you all the way on your train of thinking about God, but I'm going to give you this. I'll admit I'm not God. Dude, there's so much potential and so much hope for that person, because like you've alluded to just a minute ago, man, when we're out there, when we're active, there was nothing or nobody that we'll listen to. Nobody. And we need to You know, let me put it into this context. None of my family was ever able to get through to me about how bad my drinking was. None of my ex-wife, she couldn't get through to me. My mom, my sister, my dad, nobody could get through to me, no matter how much they cried or pleaded or anything like that. I couldn't even convince myself for several years to take that step of getting the help that I needed, because I was always stuck in the idea that I could control this. I could control the drinking. I could try to become the gentleman drinker, you know, using a glass, you know, and things like that. Now that would last maybe one drink. The glass would end up, you know, back in the kitchen. The cap would go in the trash, and then I was just drinking straight out of the bottle. And that spun out of control for, you know, that ended up weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months. And my last run was 3 years. There's no secret in that, how that all ended for me. But it was that very, very bottom, that final step, man, where I had to say, I can't do this. I can't. And I didn't want to die. As close as I was to death at that point, man, I really didn't want to die. And one of the things that always stuck in my mind, man, was I didn't want to die a drunk. And this was one of the things, this is one of the only memories that I have of really wanting to try to do it for someone else, is I thought, man, I really don't want to die a drunk, because I don't want to do that to my dad, you know.
So you still had some decency left. That's
a couple shreds. I mean, that's like I said in that episode, man, there's in every addict, man, there's a real person in there.
Oh yeah.
It's buried though, man, under this insanity that we get stuck in as users, you know. And I'm not going to quibble over semantics or the way that certain people, you know, argue.
Yeah, well, you, from what I know of you, Ian, and I remember the first time I met you, or one of the first times that I shook your hand, you had the shakes, and I knew right then and there, and I think that's why I felt a connection. But I know, you know, in your later stages of your drinking, you know, and I know you've been through combat and a lot of other things, but I remember when you went through your detox, man, and that you were, you know, a lot of people detox, but I know that you were experienced a severe one by what you were describing, and you described it a few times, but you were close to death there, and I think that you might have been close to developing a wet brain. Cause I know that you were drinking a lot up in the mountains, man. I know I was worried sick. You did tell me at one time that you were just going to drink yourself to death up there, and that's when, I think it was 2007. That was when the bottom fell, man, right there in Vegas, that bust and recession. And so I was didn't have a whole lot of money left. I remember I had a credit card one left that didn't get canceled. This is in sobriety, you know, and I was just at such a peace right at that point. That I went and rented a car, and that's when I came up to Santa Barbara and went to visit you. But, you know, what I'm trying to say, Ian, I know where you were at, man. And when you described that shivering, that detox that you went through, I knew you were close, man. And I know it took you about another 8 months to really get sober, but yeah, I mean, you talked about it, you know, with the Four Horsemen, whatever it is, you know, your mom couldn't get through to you. I remember that, man. Yeah, most family members can't, man. You got to get to that point, man. You know?
Right.
And a lot of people might not get to that point, man. They might just get 8 feet under before that, you know? That's
sad. It's sad. That's a sad reality of it, Randy. And even after, man, I mean, there's so many people, man, that I've known, that I was close with, that have died, whether from drinking themselves to death or a combination of drinking and pills or ODing on heroin. Or there's a couple of them that I could think of that, sadly, man, they're still out there trying to control it, man. And I see their life unraveling around them. And I can only do for them what you did for me, man. And that's just kind of be there as a friend. I'm not going to co-sign their crap, but, just be there, be that person, man, that can hold up the real positive things that they have going on. That reminder, because like I know you've experienced, and I know like Gary for sure, man, he experienced them too, is that we lose sight, we lose track of what was really out there, and our mind and the substance, man, is playing tricks on us, saying that, there's nobody left. And that doesn't go away quickly, even after abstinence, in early recovery, that there's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of baggage that comes along with it, and it takes people out. It's that 800-pound gorilla, man. And until you can effectively get that bastard off your back, dude, it's, and you certainly can't do that alone, but a big step to that, man, is admitting you can't carry it around. Find a place to dump it. And that's what, like you mentioned, either somebody in a fellowship, a mentor, just somebody that can empathize with where you're at and not judge you. That's one of the big things I see out there too, is people just, there's so much shame involved with it that we can't really go to our family members and just unload on them because they can't understand, because they haven't had that experience. However, another addict, like you with me, you came to visit me at that point, man. We'd known each other, 5 years, something like that. And we've always, in Vegas, we were close and, spent some time together out there. And I know there you'd mention it to me every now and then, but there were some times where you just had to ease off and back off. I appreciated that, looking back on that, Randy, because when you get into somebody's face about all of that, it could just push them away. It just push them back out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I knew better to, especially yourself, man.
But we do that to ourselves too, man.
Yeah.
And that I think is what I want to try to get at in this episode, man, is we are our own worst enemy in a lot of cases, man. And our best thinking is what got us to where we are at the end of things. And so it is that surrender of self. Give it over to something, right? That's what I really wanted to hit home on that. And so let me ask you this. Do you find that your spiritual program, your clearly that didn't just happen overnight. It's changed over years. Are there things that you have to give up in order to make that happen? Because I know it's very important to you, as is your sobriety. But are there things early on that you weren't willing to give up to make that time happen, that you've eventually come to the point where you're like, yeah, maybe I should do this instead of this?
Yeah. Last 5 years, in sobriety, you go through just phases, man. And not that you're, taking your will back or anything like that, but circumstances in life, life goes on, man. When we get sober, we think the world stops and waits for us to get. No, life goes on. And along the way, I had to change. I was still carrying some bitterness, man, some resentments and a little bit of grudge. And I don't, and I could talk the talk, man, but it wasn't leaving me. Things go real good and, it kind of gets suppressed down and then when things go bad, it comes back and you start. I have a tendency to maybe blame people. It could be my wife or parents. I'll go back and try to dissect my upbringing and who did this and who did that. I had a real hard time with that. That's when I really get a little more spiritual to get my heart fixed, man. And that was Christ. And that was the big change in my sobriety. AA worked wonderful for me, man. That fellowship was beautiful. My first year of sobriety, and and then 8 or 9 months later, all of a sudden the obsession was lifted, and that's when things really started to kick in. And okay, there's definitely something out there, So,
meaning, what do you mean by definitely something out there?
That removes that. There's what I mean is
like God.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There might be people listening that might not want to hear that, Ian. But yeah, that's my story. But yes, God did remove this obsession. Who else could have? Do you think it's just because I didn't pick up for 8, 9 months, and it's just, maybe some might think that, Ian, some might think that's not God. That's just that getting out of your system. It takes a little while.
Yeah. But
do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, Randy. And I can tell you that for me, I quit for 10 months, when I was up in Washington. I quit for 10 months. I had a bad experience, and detox, man. And boy, that was rough, dude. And the only thing that I ever remotely attribute, any sort of recognition of God in that process is that I swore to God that I was never going to drink again. After that, I never thought of God again. I tried to do it on my own. I tried to, like I've said before, I changed my habits. I did all of these things that in a lot of these fellowships they tell you needs to happen. Nothing changes if nothing changes, right? So I changed everything, but I changed everything on the outside. I changed my actions. I changed the external. I didn't do any work to my inner self. I didn't come to any conclusions that it took more than what I was doing to remain sober.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I did pick up and drink again, that run lasted 3 years. And it wasn't until the end of that, I came to the conclusion that I couldn't do it on my own based on the experience that I'd had before. Still wasn't a real, I guess my thing with God I've always believed in God. But I was ashamed to go to God and ask him for any kind of help. There was a shame that came along with that. And that shame didn't break down for anything that I did though. But I'll tell you, in that detox center, like I mentioned before, he met me there, man. And it was very clear that my drinking was done and I needed to go into that program and I needed to do what I was told to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And you know what? I believe God put me there, but part of that program, Randy, was I was required to belong to a 12-step fellowship. They didn't specify which one. I had to work with a sponsor. I had to attend a church. I had to partake in some form of physical activity, and I had to eat, and I had to participate, and I had to and like I mentioned before too, a huge part of it is we served the homeless. There was a homeless shelter. There was a rehab center and the homeless shelter there. So I am fully convinced that regardless of how somebody may feel about a 12-step fellowship or any of that, God put me right there in the middle of that program where it was required. I think you and me have talked off mic about some of the hangups that we have about some of those things. And, but I'll say this, I have similar hangups to what people might consider one-step programs. I don't think that Jesus is a button that you can push and everything in your life is miraculously going to become better. I think it's a step in the right direction for sure. But what I'm hearing you tell me, and I think what I experienced too a little bit, was that there's still hardships that come along in recovery. There's no, just because we're anchored in something that we feel is important, like Christ, doesn't mean that our life is magically going to get better.
Yeah.
There is an amount of work that has to come with this. There is an amount of self-retrospection and that daily sort of reminder that we do belong to someone else. We do have a larger purpose. We do have other things that we need to be beholden to, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's ultimately what I'm getting at when I say that surrender is a big part of a addict's life. At least one that wants to recover. I mean, there's surrender. An active addict, they surrender all the time to their substance, all the time. I did. And then that's where the ugliness happens. That's where all of that justification and rationalization and all of that really just messed up way of thinking starts in. You know, there's that glimmer of sanity kind of under the surface that can hear the mother, hear the father, hear the wife, hear everybody else tell them, man, you're destroying yourself. You have so much potential. You have this, this, and this. And then immediately that can get closed off, discarded to wherever that stuff stays, and forgotten.
Yeah. You know, I was just thinking about anybody that was listening, that's listening now, that surrendering, you know, not only, you know, the past and the future, surrendering comes along with gratitude, you know, surrendering yourself to where you're no longer thinking about what you don't have. You know, start switching your mind over to just take a look at what God has done for you. Look, I mean, it's probably not going to work for somebody that's just getting sober because they probably lost everything.
Yeah, but you know what, Randy? The best place for a person like that to start is just think about that every breath they're taking is a gift. That's how somebody like me that was such a hardhead, man, and experienced something like detoxing from alcohol. One of the two substances that they know for a fact will kill you, man, when you try to detox from that. It's the only substance that affects every cell in the human body simultaneously. Mm-hmm. There's nothing good about it. You're poisoning yourself.
Yeah.
You know, but the weird part is that for the saturated alcoholic like I was, you know, basically pickle, you know, it had its way of making things physically. I'd feel better. You know, if I was feeling real bad and I drank, I would feel better. Mm-hmm. You know, there's no doubt about that. But that relief was very short lived, and it did not come alone. You know, it came with the four horsemen. It came with that darkness that comes, and that wanting to escape from everybody around me. You know, I've told you before, I was never a bar drinker. Bars for me were good places to go fight, you know, and I love to fight probably more than anything. I really always enjoyed it. But I wouldn't go to bars to drink. Never, you know, when I was a kid, yeah, we'd go to bars and it was kind of fun. That whole fun stage of my drinking. But when we think about, you know, Randy, I think about like, in my life now, and I've mentioned this before in a podcast, there's everything in my life that I have now. I have no choice but to thank God that it's here, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have it. Now, I want to say this, that everything, including my marriage, I met my wife, we've known each other since we were kids, but I was actually looking for somebody that had a very positive impact on my childhood when I re-met with my wife and her family. And then we started talking, and then I was still in the program, so we didn't date, you know, because it was one of those rules. But after the program ended, we did go out and we did start dating. and we decided to get married, and it's really great. We lost a pregnancy early on in our marriage, and it was really bad. It was really rough, and it was sad. It was one of the most difficult things that we've gone through as a couple. But out of that came this idea of maybe adopting and then, so through that hardship, here we come into becoming foster parents. And through this being foster parents, we've adopted a child, and now we have another placement with us. My point to this is, Randy, is that addiction has shaped my entire life as it is now, meaning that God has taken all of that damage that I've done through almost 3 decades of drinking and has brought me to this point where I am now taking care of children who come out of really bad situations.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's a very beautiful story, and it has really nothing to do with me other than this. Every day is a challenge. Every day is, I need to surrender. I need to do that, man, because I'll be 50 in a couple weeks. The majority of my life, I've had no children. I've had no other responsibility other than businesses or anything like that. I was basically pretty solitary. Dude, now I've got a 3-year-old, a newborn baby, of all this stuff. And you know what, man? I'm as happy as I've ever been. But I know that if I don't surrender myself to their needs, I'm a goner. Because I fully believe this, man, that God has put them in my life, along with my wife and my family and all of this stuff, has put these people in my life to keep me where I'm at. I don't know if that makes sense, but I recognize that. And the reason I strive to recognize that is because if I don't, it would be super easy to spin off and be like, screw this, man. This is way too hard.
Yeah, that's Ian. It is, man. It's a beautiful thing how your life is, and you, just the other day we were talking, and you're like, wind's throwing sand in my face, and you were kind of giggling, and I remember getting off the phone thinking, man, it all fits perfectly. It really does, Ian. And I'm sorry to hear about what you and Julie went through. I can somewhat relate. Years ago, my ex-fiance went through that early, and it's just a hard thing for a woman to go through beyond our imagination. We don't really know, Ian.
Yeah, but Randy, no, we don't know. We don't. But, I thank God that happened when I was sober and in successful recovery, because it afforded me to share in that with her and really understand where that pain, just all you can't relate to the physical things, but you can relate to, we've had other things happening. And I think one of the important things, and why I would bring any of this up, just kind of as a side note, is that there are people out there that may think, well, yeah, I tried that God thing one time, but, nothing good ever happened to me. Or, yeah, I just got tired of kind of waiting on God, and my life just kept kind of going downhill. And I just want to reemphasize, God isn't a magician, or Jesus isn't a button that you can push and all of a sudden your life is going to be perfect, because that's the wrong perspective. And I don't want to turn this into a big theological discussion. This isn't the podcast for that, but I would just say this, that if you're perspective is for the temporal or the temporary, the worldly thing, the successes that you have here define you type of thinking, you're right. But if your thinking shifts and you can start thinking about things beyond this world, beyond your understanding, beyond any human comprehension, thinking to the eternal, that's where you start getting into the nuts and bolts of how Scripture is going to tell you a relationship with Christ works. And there's a ton of, I just say anybody that's interested in that, they can email me, whatever, but there's a ton of really good resources out there that can explain that their programs designed, they can explain the theology, they can explain that stuff. And there's a lot of really good ones. There's a lot of really bad ones, but again, I'm not here to debate that, but.
Well, Dean, to take it back a notch, let's back with the surrendering. I don't know about with you, man. My biggest struggles, man, is people. I take things to heart sometimes. So I think it's the people thing is what I struggle with. And I think it's because, for those of you that don't know me, I grew up hard of hearing as a young kid, born with nerve deafness. So growing up, man, I had to really put the pieces together to figure out what he said or why they're laughing, or even come sometime where maybe somebody was making fun of me and I knew why. And so I developed a bit of a paranoia along the way. And so in my adult life, I'm 43 years old, going to be 44 here real soon. And I'm still looking at the corner of my eye. Like I've got this, my wife calls me shifty because I'll be looking at somebody straight in my eyes to the right, man, watching, or to the left. So I'm not the greatest with when it comes to people, and I've got a lot of love in my heart. I guess it's just that's been my struggle, and so I for people to listen, surrendering, now allowing people to affect you the way they do, that's real key.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
I do, because Randy, you need to surrender to that. You need to humble yourself to that, right? That surrender yourself to the point of where you are responding negatively or responding childishly or inappropriately to something like that could send you back years in your development and in your way of thinking. Any of us, really. And, I think about it. When I think about it this way, we're talking to addicts. We're talking to people, hopefully, that are in recovery. The level of success is not important at that point, as long as hopefully we're talking to people that are trying. They're wrestling with some of these issues that we're talking about. They can understand where we've come from, and we can understand where they come from. And I know we're reaching people like that. I hear from them all the time. And like I said, well, I'm really blessed for that. But let's put it into this way. Maybe let's take a successful person, right? Big air quotes there. What we would consider successful. Let's take a doctor, for instance. So this person did schooling, spent 8 years, went to a 4-year, went to medical school, probably a couple $100,000 in debt, and hopefully is getting paid what they're worth. But a doctor, as a nurse or anybody else, they don't get just a one-time license and it ends there. They have to continually maintain education to keep up on the most current things out there for them to become a successful doctor. So my point in saying that is recovery is the same. We want to become successful in recovery. We can't just, and like I said in episode 8, man, we can't just do that one thing and rest on it and just expect our life to become better. It doesn't work that way. It's a series of actions that work in concert with one another to bring about successful recovery. So that self-forgiveness is key. And that right there, my friend, is a very good example of surrender. Because if you can surrender to that, really wrap your head around it and say, you know what, man, I'm not that person that did that. Don't let somebody else define you, man. And when you're letting your past define you, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, Ian, for me, man, I'm glad that you brought that up as far as forgiveness, man. And I know that was in the last episode, but that's why I enjoyed that a lot, man. And that's been a big, you know, I might have to get back into that step again, man, that 5th step, or I just don't do well with a lot of people, I guess. I just don't. What would you call that? What is that?
Normal? I don't know. I don't do good with a lot of people either, but a lot of mine is I don't do well with loud noises. I don't do good with any of that, man. I can't walk through a Walmart without just,
really?
Yeah, man. I don't do well with that stuff, man. I just want to say this, and as we wrap up, surrender's key. And whether we have a problem with God or not, find something to surrender to. And usually that's going to be ourselves first. You know, I don't know. Maybe that's not the right thing to say. Surrender, endure. I guess surrender, that self-forgiveness, that type of stuff.
Yeah, surrendering it has to be every day, though, man. Ian, even 3 or 4 times a day. But I'm very big on that thing in the mornings, man. Before you head out that door, get right, surrender, offer yourself to God, and ask Him to use you as a tool for Him and others, man. Just give that a shot. Ask Him to put some people in your life that are going to help you stay sober, and just something that simple. I mean, you don't really have to necessarily, fully believe in the beginning, just do that, man. Get out of yourself and admit that, hey, man, you can't do this on your own at all. And start taking some suggestions, man. Just say, hey, you tell me what to do, man, and I'm going to do it, so,
right. It takes that honesty. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about some honesty next time, man, because that is, that's all part of it. That's all part of those layers, that make up good recovery: surrender, self-forgiveness, and honesty. Those 3 things. All right, Randy. Thanks, buddy.
Yes, Ian. It's good. It's always a pleasure, man.
All right, man. Hey, listen, we'll be in touch, brother.